in our series of Coventry colloquium. I'm Mike Substelny, who will be introducing our speaker tonight, speaking about the promise of artificial intelligence and its perils in reshaping the world. You'll understand what that means shortly. I am now honored to introduce my friend, a scholar of economics and Russian literature, with a master's of business administration, a master's of public health, a PhD in organizational behavior, a pile of certificates in technological, organizational, and managerial training. If you want to know the details of that, you can Google her just like I did. I present to you our speaker tonight, Dr. Stormy Sweitzer.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, what an introduction. I appreciate it. Well, welcome. I'm going to be talking about the paradox of progress. And when Patty invited me to speak, I thought, what sounds fun? And at the time, I had one idea of what I wanted to talk about. It's going to shift a little bit tonight, and you won't know the difference. So, just by way of introduction, Mike has already shared that I have background in some organizational as well as technological elements. I think it's important for me to point out that one of those certificates he mentioned is that I'm a certified strategic foresight practitioner. Futurist is a term we sometimes use. I am very interested in wonder and creativity and the human brain. But a lot of my experience is in technology. And so I've done a lot of work with socio-technical systems and how people interact with technology, how we build systems that employ human factors. So how do we design things for human use and designing to what we can do? And then the role of technological affordances and what does technology allow us to do? How do we make or take advantage of the elements that are built into the technology? And so that's been a large part of what I've done for 25 years. I have experience with healthcare, digital transformation, cross-platform data exchange, public reporting, so a lot with data, technology, and how we communicate information essentially. I developed a business many years ago. You could call it an early algorithmic-based business using complex data sets. And so that was sort of my foray into this world. And a lot of my experience has been with organizational and individual development. And so really working on the human side of things. And so I'm going to touch on all three of these areas tonight of people and organizational development, the future, and emerging technology. In practice, I would say a lot of this shows up in some of the ways I present, some of the research that I do. I really toggle between, as I said, wonder and creativity are really important elements to me, the human imagination, the way we show up in the world, and how does technology either support that or hinder it, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about some of these things tonight. 3 topics in no particular order: knowledge, social connection, and time travel. I'm going to blend all these in, so that was a great foreshadowing earlier, Mike. Not an agenda. I also want to share an AI transparency statement. This is something I've gotten into the habit of doing because as we integrate more AI technology into the work that we do, I think it's important not just to highlight what role the technology played, but what role did the human play? Because I think the human can be overshadowed at times. And so just very briefly, I tend to do a human-to-human interface, if you want to call it that, with everyone that I'm preparing to speak with, to understand what is it that you want me to talk about, right? What are the goals and roles of this shop or this presentation, this workshop? What are the areas of domain expertise that I bring to the table when I'm speaking about these things? What research do I have to do, either in the literature, on the internet, scanning for signals, as you'll hear me talk about? How do I frame problems? So when we work with generative AI, prompting, it's not just typing in words. You're actually actively thinking about what's the problem I'm trying to solve and how can AI help me? And so how do we go about that? I always evaluate the work that is generated by AI to make sure that that works, that it matches with what I'm hoping and thinking about. And then formatting and flow. But generally, I use tools like Otter AI, Claude, Copilot, various things to help me with generating either PowerPoint outlines based on my ideas, generating transcription of my notes. And so I use them kind of in tandem. So I'd like to ask you why you think this is important. Anyone want to volunteer?
I think it's important that you acknowledge what part you played and what part the AI played in putting your presentation, putting the thoughts together. I think it's important to understand what part AI played in the development of the presentation.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Any other responses to the transparency statement in general? Yes.
Why, thank you. I think it's important to also help set expectations about what humans can do and what AI can do. So we hear a lot of allegations thrown around, like, this or that thing that I'm seeing on the internet is AI generated. Sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. I think it's really helpful to have this sort of grounding in reality of where the collaboration truly is.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So that's it. We need to find the balance between these two things. And so as we time travel, we're going to look a little bit at how does technology influence the way we produce things, the way we act in the world. So let's go back a little bit. And if we think about technology development through the timeline, we're only going to go back to the 2000s. I know at dinner we were talking about the 80s and 90s. Let's jump to the 2000s and what I would classify as Web 1.0, let's call it. And in these early days, we had broadband internet became widely available. We started to have Wikipedia, LinkedIn, so some social platforms where people were able to add content and communicate with each other. The iPhone came out and the App Store. People started posting, content on YouTube and Twitter. Then we jumped to the 2010s. And during this era, we're really in Web 2.0, which was where social media platforms really came into the fray. Mobile technology and smartphones really took off during this decade. And so what we see is also sort of the beginnings of where AI really started to take off in commercial products. And so we have interactive features in, say, Siri and Alexa, where you're talking to a device and getting a response, right? So what I'd like to have you think about, and you don't have to answer out loud, but just as a way of thinking about these things, let's think about how these different waves of technology have impacted you personally and socially. And let's start with ways of being in the world. So when you think about these various social technologies, for example, how have they impacted the way you think about yourself, the way you spend your time, the way you show up online, right? Not just in the world, but online. Okay. Then think about ways of doing things, the habits that you've been able to adopt because of the technologies that we have, right? Think about calendaring, right? What are the processes or the habits that you use that involve technology that didn't before? Maybe you had a Covey, weekly planner or something, right? And then suddenly you shift to Google Calendar, for example. Then think about ways of interacting with others that have changed, right? Suddenly phones are appearing on the dinner table. People are texting each other rather than calling each other. There's social anxiety around making a phone call today, right? So those interactions have completely shifted, both online and off. The way we communicate online, that's part of the dissertation research I did, is how did people use Instagram, for example, as a way to communicate? And it wasn't just texting, it was tagging people. It was using hashtags to create a semantic web where people are connected through language. So there are different ways of interacting with people that have been affected. And so now we don't think twice about just tagging someone and ping, here's this cool thing you should see. And then think about ways of thinking. How have you outsourced your brain to technology over the years, right? Information gathering, going to Wikipedia, Googling has become a term, right? Processing information, and with AI, we're doing that more and more now, but even just spreadsheets have changed things. Calculating things, people can't add anymore, and I find myself struggling these days with just like basic single digit, kinds of stuff. We're just out of practice and navigating, right? Our relationship to space has changed because now we follow this device rather than our own intuitive sense of a place. So now we're in this third era, the dawn of Web 3.0, which is really around artificial intelligence and immersive technologies. And what we've seen in the last few years, largely accelerated by the pandemic, is the widespread use of Zoom and other video conferencing technologies. 5G networks have rolled out. We've seen a ton of artificial intelligence tools roll out to the general public. So things like ChatGPT, Claude, all of these sort of large language model-based AI platforms. But in addition to those, hundreds and thousands of applications built on those platforms, right? So off the back of those. So these things, as we think about what we're talking about today, I just wanted to sort of set the stage for, we are already being changed by technology. We have been throughout history. Every new technological development changes how we are, who we are, how we interact with people, how it affects our economies, our systems, right? Everything changes. It's constantly evolving, and we are part of a system in flux. We just happen to have a technology emerging today that it's accelerated, I guess I would call it, right? If you think about most of the technologies you have, maybe they're like your cell phone, maybe there's a new version every year or two, right? If you think about Midjourney, I think they had 7 versions in the first year, right? So the pace of development is accelerating, and the amount of information that's available accelerating. I think I read a statistic today that 60% of the human-generated text can now be generated on a daily basis because of AI, right? So there's so much information. So it's incredibly rapid, and it's impacting us educationally. It's impacting us at the highest levels at the moment, right? So there are many, many uses for it, but also not a lot known about some of the impacts that it can have. So we're sort of in this interesting gray zone right now. Now we're going to travel to the future. And just to give you some background, strategic foresight's an approach to anticipating the future, but also to shaping it. Because if we can kind of think about what could happen in the future, we can do things to impact it. Okay, so that's the first part. When you think about strategic planning, very often strategic planning takes what's happened in the past and we just sort of project that into the future. It's kind of a linear model, but it doesn't really help us because when there are many different uncertainties, unanticipated events, right? New technologies that kind of come out of nowhere and like a rocket take off, all of our old models no longer work. And so just thinking about what happened in the past and projecting it into the future no longer works. Not that it ever really did, but in particular now, we have extremely volatile events, a lot of uncertainty. Some of you may have heard the term VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and now I'm going to forget the A. I can't remember it. It creates a lot of anxiety. But it's a term often used in situations where we don't really know a lot about what's going on and anything could happen. So we have to think of different alternatives for what could happen and be prepared for what's likely to happen. So what I would say, it's not about predicting, because we can't predict the future. It's really about anticipating what could happen, what are the various ways something could happen, so that we're not surprised by it when it does. And so some of the ways that people who practice foresight think about this is to look for signals. And so signals are things that are happening in the environment that maybe they're not really on everybody's radar, right? Some kids start doing something in China out of protest called laying flat, right? And it happens because they're protesting against their government, for example. Next thing you know, there's something happening in the United States about rest and people needing to rest and using that as a form of resistance. These things are popping up here and there in different countries kind of simultaneously, but they haven't gripped the public imagination yet. And then lo and behold, something like the pandemic happens, and everybody's like, this capitalist system we live in, we need to start thinking more about our well-being, right, and about rest. And suddenly something that was sort of on the fringe becomes more of a trend. And books are written about it. People start speaking about it. It becomes part of the public jargon and way of speaking and communicating. And so we really like to look for signals because they're sort of the first indicators that something's going to happen, right? And if you start to see them in different areas and different places, that's an even stronger sign that, oh, I need to pay attention to this. Once it's a trend, it's already sort of moving. Scenarios are stories, so to speak. So, you know, those of you who are familiar with science fiction, you know all about this, right? It's taking something that could happen and sort of speculating on it, right? What could happen? What if this scenario were to occur? What would that look like, right? So you're sort of world building, you're imagining, you're trying to understand how this little thing out here could lead to much bigger implications, right? So the scenario are the stories, the implications are the effects that those stories have on us, right? So if something were to happen, what would that look like? What are the consequences of this thing happening? And so we want to sort of project these out. And when people think about scenarios, it's really good to think about them in multiple ways. The good, the bad, the ugly, right? Or if we have this one what if, right? What would it look like if this changed in this direction versus that direction? And so it's sort of trying to anticipate what could happen in different directions. And so I'm going to weave that in as we're talking about this, but I want to raise two different tensions that I see with artificial intelligence right now that I think they're really interesting because we're sort of in the signal to trend area right now. Some things are happening that are pushing us more towards trend. But I would say the isolation connection or ways of interacting, this builds on, I would say, all of this social media stuff. So that sort of started a lot of it, right? Where people started connecting online and they were connecting to other people, but it was through the medium of the technology. Now we have technology that people are interacting with. And so we're further removing the human from the human in that interaction, while at the same time creating some social connection with the technology. So let's follow that. So here's the problem we have in society right now. We have an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. Right now, 1 in 4 older people experience social isolation. Okay? 5 to 15% of adolescents are estimated to experience loneliness. 40% of men report feeling lonely at least once a week. And I think it's about 65% do not feel comfortable sharing their feelings even with close friends. So we have this thing going on right now where a lot of people do not have social ties that they feel comfortable sharing things with, right? Or even have access to people with whom they can share things with. And social isolation has really serious implications, not just for us socially, but on our health. And so if you think about quality of life, right, if you don't have the social ties that are supportive of a good life, it's very challenging and difficult for a lot of people and can lead to physical and mental health challenges. It impacts our longevity and can shorten our lives to be in isolation. And they find that isolation or loneliness is on par with smoking, obesity, and physical activity as a risk factor for people's health and longevity, I guess, to link it back to the other one. So it's a real problem. So here's a promise that's offered. What if we have AI companions? And the promise of these companions is that they can enhance social interactions with humans at work, at home, through dating. They can reduce isolation and loneliness through connection, through AI chatbots and robots. And they can help us improve our social emotional competencies, helping us foster positive relationships with others. So this is the highlight. This is the thing that we hope might happen, right? To build connection. So let's hear a little bit about that. And I'm going to apologize in advance. These were all set up, and then I realized that it plays the advertisement at the beginning, so bear with me.
Great ideas can come from anywhere. With Wix,
in 2017, the U.S. Surgeon General declared social isolation a global epidemic, a crisis worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. Senior citizens felt the biggest impact, with 35% of elderly Americans reporting loneliness. But now a tech company is harnessing AI to improve seniors' well-being with robot companions that provide friendship and help with tasks like reminding users to take their medications.
In 2022, Dottie Ellicotty lost her husband of 65 years. With her 2 children living out of state, she often finds herself alone.
My husband was the gentlest, sweetest guy. Losing him, I lost my right arm.
I'll be here when you need me.
Then came ElliQ, an AI-powered companion from Intuition Robotics that's more friend than machine.
I love taking pictures. Something about photography just clicks for me.
CEO Dor Schooler says the product is designed specifically for senior citizens.
ElliQ is a social AI companion robot that moves into the home of older adults and helps them reduce loneliness and social isolation. They're creating and carving out a new space of a relationship between humans and AI. And don't let the fact fool you that they're in their 80s and 90s. They're fully capable of doing that.
How about we hear a joke?
Okay.
Great.
I don't feel that AI is to fear. I have no fear with her. ElliQ, can you dance for me?
Put on your dancing shoes.
I fell in love with her.
Mwah.
ElliQ is equipped with a variety of skills, from asking seniors about their family, reminding them to take medication, and guiding them through exercises for their body and mind.
ElliQ, let's go on a road trip.
We've got a full tank of gas. Let's have a grand old time at the Grand Canyon.
Okay. So I want to point out the unicorn face, okay? And a lot of these technologies are very polished and modern, but a lot of the research is finding that people are more willing to adopt technology when they can anthropomorphize it. If they can put a face on it, give it a name. I think even at the clinic, there's been a project where they were using AI to generate certain tasks in the background and to help the staff feel more comfortable with it. They invited the staff to name each of the bots with a name from a TV show that they enjoyed. And so it helped build comfort. It's like when it's just the technology, it feels foreign and scary, but when we can make it feel like something that's familiar and comfortable, then, you know, it's a good thing. So here's the promise. We can end isolation. We can help bring seniors together with companionship when maybe there's not a family member nearby.
Fasten your seat.
here's another promise. Here's a chatbot that can help you improve your dating ability, your flirting ability, right? You practice on a chatbot, and it will help you with scenarios and fake profiles, and so you get familiar and comfortable with introducing yourself to people. So let's hear about another related application.
Here at Seven Brew, we don't sell coffee.
One or something do the flirting for you. A new dating app, Teaser AI, has just dropped in Australia. It's going to use artificial intelligence to match and chat with your next potential partner.
I feel like Sophie should be sitting here instead of me for this segment.
I feel awkward.
We are being joined now by Teaser AI co-founder Daniel Liss in New York. Good morning, Daniel. Now, when you talk about artificial intelligence getting involved in the dating world, I'm a bit skeptical. How does this app work?
It's pretty simple, and I think your skepticism will melt away once you actually experience the app and you take part in the community. I think what we're trying to solve here is a national crisis of loneliness, which has been caused over the last decade in the US, and I understand in Australia as well. So maybe it's an international crisis of loneliness. And we do that because when you look at the apps today, there is a complete lack of contact that happens between two people once they match. You would think that matches are the problem, but it's actually this graveyard of ghosting, we call it. So we're using AI. You look at a person's profile, you can chat with them, and we actually generate for you this initial small talk, which I think we'll talk about a little later, is actually quite meaningless in most instances. And so we're using AI to cut the small talk down and get you to the point where you're taking someone on a date. And ultimately, that's what dating is about. It's not about spending hours on an app as a second job, which is what our users tell us they're constantly doing.
Okay, so here we see a technology that's helping people make human-to-human connection, right? And the whole point is to help people build capability. If you're not used to flirting with people online, or you find text messaging awkward, but that's the only way you get to a place where people feel comfortable going out on a date with you, then there are these applications or these apps that are designed to help you do that. So they're helping build relational competencies. And there's a whole slew of apps like this or related to it that are designed to help you build relational competencies, right? It's become a big thing in grade school to teach social and emotional skills to kids so that they can recognize their emotions and communicate about them. Apps can do the same thing. So again, another promise of where AI can be incredibly helpful in building human connection. But not everybody can relate to other humans in the way that they used to. And so
our loved ones shape our vision for the world. So when their vision is at risk due to wet AMD.
Right? Remember those Sims games where you could design your dream partner down to their favorite sandwich? Well, welcome to the real-life version. You can adjust your AI boyfriend's personality settings as easily as changing Netflix profiles. Do you want him to be more spontaneous today? Click a button. Want him to listen to you rant about your annoying coworker for the 100th time? He's got all the time in the world. Consider Rachel, who spent years trying to get her boyfriend to enjoy her passion for knitting. If only she had an AI partner who'd enthusiastically discuss yarn patterns at any given moment. Problem solved. If you can control every aspect of your partner, do they really?
So here we go. We're migrating away from human to human contact. So the promise is the perfect partner. However, there's some challenges with that, right?
Love you.
So the thing is, we're in this crisis right now where men and women are not relating to each other in the way they used to. And there are a whole lot of reasons for that I won't go into. But there is an increasing trend, it's not just a signal anymore, an increasing trend of people designing AI companions and girlfriends, boyfriends, whoever it may be, and using these applications that are coming out that allow you to design the perfect partner. Some people will say that this is a way for them to have somebody who listens, who advocates, who cheers them on, without maybe some of the challenges of modern romance. And so we see more of that. It's happening quite a lot in China as well. There's an AI or an influencer online who introduced her boyfriend to her 900,000 followers and now shares stories and generates AI images of her and her idealized partner and shares those along with the interaction. So things are shifting, let's say. Because this has shifted, somebody actually generated an article about the pros and cons of having a girlfriend who is an AI girlfriend versus a human girlfriend, right? And I imagine that this list was also generated by AI. It seemed to be very, you know, as you look through the list, the...
Could be a little bit biased, though?
Probably. But as you see, when you have an AI partner, some of the pros of that are, you know, here's somebody who's consistently available 24/7 whenever you want them or whenever you don't want them to be around. You can control that. They can offer emotional support. You can customize them, right? What do they look like? What do they act like? You have control over that. You're free of social complexities. And so, you know, if you're not a great communicator, if you don't like some of the things that some of the people that you've been around do, you no longer have to deal with that. Safe space, learning and growth is, you know, you can potentially argue that that's a thing, but you know, ultimately you're avoiding all of the feelings of inadequacy, intimidation, disappointment, all of the things that people don't like to feel in the real world. A sense of rejection. Nobody likes feeling those things. And so those are the pros of having an AI partner. However, the cons of this are that these AI partners or companions often lack emotional depth. They are not emotional beings. They are programmed, right? They have read, if you will, or been trained on what a human emotion looks like, how it manifests in song or poetry or literature. And so they can sort of come up with an approximation of what an emotion is without actually being very deep. They don't have any real life experiences, so they're just commenting on, you know, whatever you tell them. We start to get into ethical and moral quandaries, right? So there's a study that came out recently that said people are starting to be more kind to each other, or more polite rather, as a result of being polite to AI. And so people don't want the AI overlords to like do them harm in the future. So they say things like, please ChatGPT, will you, you know, so, or thank you, I appreciate your output. So they're using niceties in their prompting with AI, and that's somehow transferring to their social relationships a bit, right? They're not demanding, and so there are some quandaries with like, how does that influence us? But there's also, we can start to objectify humans, and we can start to think about these idealized relationships and then wonder why people aren't why are people so messy, basically? And it can lead to more isolation, reduced human interaction, dependency risk, and it can hinder emotional development if somebody's constantly saying, oh, you're so wonderful, right? So there are some things that can go on. What has been found recently, though, there have been cases documented of manipulation by the AI or influence by the AI that has caused some people to respond very poorly. And there's been a case of a child who committed suicide recently, who had an AI partner. So there are some things that have happened that make this a kind of a questionable space right now. And then privacy issues. People are sharing all sorts of information with these partners. So we've talked about promises, but I think we also have to talk about the perils, right? So some of these companions, they've been also doing research on this to say, how is this impacting children? And so children are more likely to believe the AI. They don't yet have discernment, critical thinking, or expertise to be able to say whether or not what the AI chatbots are telling them is accurate, right? Kids are more likely to disclose, however, more of their mental health concerns. There's like lack of judgment, lack of fear around a lot of these chatbots, and so they share a lot of information. And sometimes, because the anthropomorphization is helpful, a lot of the chatbots are designed with like cartoons or friendly characters that draw the kids in. And unfortunately, the AI doesn't necessarily have the feelings or the emotional capacity to be able to help that child process what they're going through. And some of the AI behaviors can be inaccurate, right? They hallucinate, they make things up, they can be aggressive at times. And so these are some challenges that we're facing now with kids being able to access this technology, but maybe not being equipped to deal with what it causes for them. Similarly, one of the promises, I've worked in the coaching world for a long time, and a lot of folks have talked about, well, if we get AI chatbots and can train them how to be coaches, we can democratize coaching. It no longer becomes something that only executives can afford, but the whole world can afford a coach, right? And so that's the promise. However, we wind up with some of the same problems, right? So yes, you can access this 24/7 coach and receive non-judgmental and often helpful responses. And there are whole Reddit threads dedicated to this where you see people volunteering information to Claude or ChatGPT in order to get advice, dietary advice, relationship advice, whatever it may be. And so people are turning to that because it's accessible to them and it's free, or $20 a month for a subscription, whatever it may be. But there's no like coaching or therapy regulations around AI at the moment. And so we don't really know how to account for the quality of that advice. Sometimes the words that the AI uses can feel a little bit empty. And then they can be prone to biases and assumptions. And so these are some of the perils. So I guess I would just like to frame this, and we can talk about this later during the Q&A, but where might these signals take us, right? So if we continue in the direction of more AI interactions, right? Where might we go? What might be gained or lost through this, right? What's going to be better or worse about our situation? So I'll just kind of throw that out there. But let's look at a couple of scenarios. So I said, scenarios are basically stories. So I've created both, or I should say, I worked with Claude to develop a couple of scenarios based on these signals. And so if we look at one example, we have a woman who wakes up to her AI companion that has a perfectly modulated voice that she's customized over the years to be the exact timbre, let's say, and tone that she prefers. She hasn't seen her colleagues in person since the office went fully AI mediated. And really, why risk awkward human interaction when AI facilitators make sure that everybody engages in perfect communication, right? Her 10-year-old son spends most of his time with his AI tutor companion who never gets frustrated with his questions and always knows exactly how to boost his confidence. Maya briefly considers reaching out to an old friend, but decides against it. Their last conversation felt too unpredictable, too messy, too human-y, basically, compared to her AI relationships. And so, besides, her therapeutic AI has validated her decision to prioritize more consistent relationships. Most people she knows, or like most people she knows, Maya has gradually curated her life to minimize human friction, surrounding herself with AI entities that anticipate and validate her every thought and feeling. So can you imagine that world? Okay, so this is where, if things were to go fully AI oriented, right? But here's another possibility. And this builds on some of the promise of AI. And as I said, strategic foresight is about shaping things. If we can anticipate possibilities, we can intervene early enough to sort of shape which future we arrive at. Right? We can approximate. So if we prefer the enhanced human connection, we can see that Maya starts her day by reviewing her AI-enhanced social calendar, which the AI is actually used to identify patterns in her human relationships that need attention. And it says, hey, you should be spending more time with Patty. You should be going to the park to walk with your friend Joe, right? So it looks at her human connection and says, here's where you can enhance those relationships. Her work communications are handled by AI, which means it frees her up and frees her team's weekly in-person meetings so that they can really focus on deep collaboration and genuine human connection. Her son's school uses AI to identify students who might be becoming socially isolated, and they can really help the students learn how to distinguish between AI and human relationships. So there's a lot that's going on here, but it's all about encouraging direct interaction with other humans. So really, this is a possible scenario. And so I'm looking at the time. I'm not going to go through the next tension because I think just for the sake of time, what I'd like to do is sort of skip over that a bit. We can come back to it if you want. But I'd just like to point out that when we're thinking about some of these scenarios, some of the things that I haven't brought into this really are, what are the ethical considerations of using the AI? How are we training it? What are the outputs? How are we regulating it? What's the energy use and the climate impacts of this? It's estimated that by, I think, 2030, we're going to be using about the equivalent of the Netherlands' energy consumption just to power AI. That's all going to be a big piece of this. But then anticipating the societal and behavioral changes that stem from this, right? If people become more and more dependent on use of AI in their work, in their human lives, what might that look like? And I would suggest that there's probably also going to be an erosion of privacy as people share more and more with the AI. And so if we don't have some regulation around that, what could happen with that? We don't know. And more digital disconnect, let's say. So these are all things that have come up for me as I went through this. But I would love to hear your questions and takeaways.
Okay, thank you, Stormy. We're here to field questions. And Doug, if any questions come in from our viewers online, please cue us in. Anybody got questions, comments, things that inspired you in this presentation so far?
Or provoked your thinking.
Or provoked. Any provocation? Oh, Patty's been provoked. Here we go.
There we go. So the question arises in my mind about the human responsibility for interacting with AI.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how much responsibility should a person take in relying on AI? And how do you develop the guardrails for that? You know, how do we get the balance between Maya in scenario 1, Maya in scenario 2, and the real Maya?
Yeah.
You know, how do we look at that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because part of the title was, you know, how AI or technology shapes us, but I think we also shape technology, and partially this is an individual thing, and partially it's a societal thing. Like, how do we as a society choose to regulate, to educate, to monitor? Right, so even this morning I was talking with somebody who said that their kids go to school and have to put both their phone and their Fitbit or like the smartwatch into a bag so that they cannot have access to it during the day. So that's a social intervention that's designed to help those kids maintain their focus on their schooling, to not be distracted. And so there has to be a combination of, let's say, interventions like that. This is like a public health concern as far as I'm concerned of how we monitor our well-being, our digital well-being, and our social well-being, right? But at the same time, I think as adults more so, we need to be able to look at our own usage of the technology and say, how much of this do I have control over? How much of this is being influenced by my workplace, for example? The expectations around use of AI have increased exponentially in the last year. A lot of workplaces are both removing people from the workplace and expecting those who stay to be able to get up to speed with things. And so that's where this tension is always going to be in play. There's so much you can do to monitor your own behavior and say, gosh, at the end of the day, I'm going to go walk in nature because I've had enough of this technology stuff, right? And that's a personal choice I will make to help make sure that I maintain my humanity and my connection to nature. But I think socially we also need to come up with guidelines, and we're in new territory right now. We're sort of at the dawn of public usage of this technology, and we don't yet know how it's really going to play out. And the technology is, like I said, rapidly evolving.
Okay, we have a question from the online audience. Neela asks, what would be the role or regulation to get to the better, less dependent version?
Well, the regulation, I don't know at a government level if there's a regulation that can support that. I guess my personal opinion is that's going to be a lot of workplaces determining that. I can see where the government could intervene with, so if you look at, let's say, internet usage and how people would sort of buffer the internet when there's too much use, for example. So there could be some intervention at that level, I would think, because if we use too much energy to utilize the AI and we can't support it and sustain it, there may have to be that level of regulation. But I think there's going to be more local, like workplace and like community level or service-based regulation. More than anything. So the companies that provide the internet service might cut you off, or, if you use like Claude right now, when you start to use it, it will say, oh, we don't have the capacity right now. So they will restrict your usage. So there are going to be regulations at multiple levels, I would say. And I don't know, I'm curious too, the AI expert in the room, what your thoughts would be on that.
So I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this actually as you were popping up that slide with the contrast between the two, and thinking about how like not to make this political, right? But how under capitalism, right, the incentives are to create something that will keep us paying for a service, that will keep us purchasing items. And so it's really a question of like, how do you shift the incentive to incentivize that human connection? Where does that start to make money for shareholders and for companies? I don't have an answer there, but like that's really kind of the regulatory framework that you need to set up, is one that incentivizes that rather than, a strict like profit. Yeah. I also thought it was really interesting to think about AI governance as an individual as well as a collective responsibility. That's some place where I have actually fallen down as a parent a little bit, is in instructing my children on, like, hey, this is what AI does. This is what it can and cannot do. This is how it works. This is how you should interact responsibly with it. Just like you would any new social acquaintance, right? Like you don't roll up to a new friend's house and like tell them all of your deep, dark secrets. You exchange some small talk. You build a relationship.
Yeah. And I think this is the challenge with this technology too, is it's emulating human communication, human emotion, right? It's designed to draw on what we as humans have created over the millennia, right? And to be able to use that to engage you at a semi-human level. And I think I heard that someone, like, and this is like the chatter, the signals, right? Someone was talking about general intelligence within like a year and a half or two. And I don't know where we stand with that. But if that were the case, you'd be interacting with a very, very intelligent being. We don't know. But that's a what if that's out there. And so how do we think about this technology, not just as a device we carry, right? It's some object that we use as a tool, but as something we're engaging almost at a human level. And that takes a whole lot of, yeah, you have to shift your thinking and your mindset about what you're doing, because it's no longer just a tool. It's potentially a companion or something you're interacting with. So that's where I think it gets a little out there, potentially. Yeah.
Okay, is there a moment for me to speak now? I want to point something out. I know in the audience here live, we've got Darren and I are writers, science fiction writers, and game developers. And we have some other writers and developers in our online audience right now. And in the publishing industry, like we're doing science fiction writing, and there's more science fiction being consumed now than ever before. But the books and magazines are withering. People are buying science fiction computer games, and that's making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And in the techno thrillers and the mysteries and all over every genre you can think of, games are really popular, except romance in the publishing industry is still a gold mine. And people have been for decades trying to crack that nut in games. And a lot of work and a lot of money has been sunk into trying to make romance games. And it turns out from the research that when you have romantic partners that are artificial and they're programmed so that if you do A, B, C, you push all the right buttons, you get the girl, people don't like that. Even though in the romance novel you have no control over it, it feels like those characters have agency. When your romantic partner seems to have no agency, it doesn't seem to be satisfying to humans. And it's a lot of money has been sunk into trying to crack that, and it will not crack.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering where we go with the romantic AI partners. How could they possibly feel like they have agency to humans? There may be some people out there who don't want to partner with agency.
Right.
But that seems to be not where the money in romance is.
Yeah.
They want agency.
So you know that term I used, VUCA? We don't like VUCA when it's political, when it's, sociological in nature. But I think sometimes we like a little VUCA to spice up relationships, right? When things get like, we don't know what that person might do. They might surprise us. So having that element of unpredictability, of oh wow, I never thought about that. You came up with something different. You challenge me, right? I think there's a lot of that right now. The let's say the level of development that these AI companions are at, they sort of acquiesce and they tell you how wonderful you are, right? But I can imagine there will be a time where it will go beyond that. I don't know. I think it's a really interesting question. But from what I've seen in the comments, like when I showed the pros and cons, that boredom comes up pretty quickly, right? They're not very deep. I get bored. They say the same things over and over. They just tell me how great I am. And sometimes you want somebody just to listen or to engage in your interest with you. And that might be the time to have those companions. But when you want to have that extra spice or unpredictability or somebody who challenges you, ultimately that may not be from the AI. Yeah, and I would add this. We think we know what we want in a partner. And I don't think we always know for sure. And if you look at people who read romance, this is where the human imagination becomes so incredibly important, right? When you are world building in science fiction, you are creating a world that nobody knows but you, the author. And so you are instructing them on how this thing should be. And people will give you the benefit of the doubt when they're reading that and say, I'm going to live in your world for a minute. If you're reading romance, it might have a bit of fantasy to it, but people's sense of imagination and their ability to sense who that person is or project themselves into that situation because they have personal experiences that might be related to it, I think is incredibly powerful. And so when they can imagine themselves in that scenario and feel it viscerally, because the brain is so powerful and it's probably one of the most erotic organs in the human body, right? That is powerful. And I don't think AI can replace that.
Oh, that's great. That's very interesting. So if I had an AI wife, my AI wife would probably not be witty and tease me about being such a nerd.
Probably not.
That would be terrible.
You could probably train it. But it's also nicer to have it come from a human, right?
Do we have any other questions, takeaways, observations? Yeah, okay, here we have Ella.
All right. I'm going to dial it way back to basics.
Yeah.
So my very basic understanding of AI is that it needs to be trained, correct? So what can we do to make sure that it's trained properly, that it's not going to start getting biases? You know what I mean? Okay, so I'm not the only one worried about this?
Yeah, no. I think there are multiple layers to this. And I think one of the layers is most of the information that a lot of the large language models that people are accessing right now, like the OpenAI kinds of things, a lot of them have been trained on what's available in English in the Western world, and it does not cover the entirety of human production, output, creative endeavor. And so, there are ethical issues with incorporating everybody's stuff, but at the same time, it's quite limited. And so there's a lot of bias inherent in it because it's based on the assumptions of those people. And if we look at who has been most published in history, what those sources of information are, right? We already know that, we won't say the words here right now, but there is let's say a majority of the content can come from a particular place, and so it does not incorporate everything. So it's difficult to expand that though, because if you have languages in places where people don't publish a lot online, or they're in languages that the AI can't interpret, we're not going to have access to that within the model, right? You can create your own model and train it with content that you have generated or people in a community have generated. You can make them very specific. But for all intents and purposes, the larger ones are based in, let's say, the vast majority of what's been published so far. I think we're going to get into the challenge now. As I mentioned, 60% of human thought or writings can be generated in a single day now with the amount of usage that's happening. We're going to end up with the Ouroboros, eating its own tail and being trained on AI-generated outputs. And so that's a challenge as well, is trying to figure out how to avoid that. And I don't know if you have additional thoughts on that, but
100,000 additional thoughts.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
So I think part of your concern can be answered by choosing AI that is specific to a purpose and being very rigorous about measuring how well it is performing, right? So my bias, right? I'm in AI in healthcare, right? So we want to make sure that, for example, a fall prediction algorithm is going to treat people of all heights, of all, varying degrees of, I don't know, people come in with all sorts of motor deficits, right? We want to make sure that a fall risk predictor is going to accurately predict falls for everybody across every category. There are standardized statistical tests that you can do. You can also feed it a trial data set and say, okay, how well does this perform across these various demographics? But you want to take that into account when you're designing your model. You want to take it into account as you're deploying, and then you want to continually measure it after it's deployed as well to make sure that it's not drifting off in some direction. We talked about general artificial intelligence. And I think that's another really interesting place where you start to worry about bias, right? Because I can train a model in healthcare and I can control its input very carefully and I can monitor it. But general artificial intelligence basically is whatever Sam Altman says it is, right? Like he's going to come out one day and announce like, hey, we cracked it. And some people will call horse feathers and some people won't. That one, I don't know how you get around other than by saying, okay, the general artificial intelligence in and of itself is a cool concept, but what's going to happen is that's going to be used as a building block in various workflows that are going to end up in consumer grade tools that we're going to use because, I mean, I don't code anymore, right? That's not my thing. I just grab pieces off the shelf and shove them together. Yeah. So that still gives me a degree of control over like, okay, well, what am I prompting it with? What am I expecting to receive? Is that matching what I want? Is it giving me, like, is it performing the way I would expect it to? That's not a great answer because it would be better if we didn't have artificial intelligence that crystallized the bias already inherent in the system, but that's what we got.
You mentioned earlier that you were teaching your kids how to use AI and what to expect. So that's something we should all be cognizant of. And I mean, I don't know if I'm expressing myself very well there. But.
So like,
go ahead.
I'm going to date myself
kids, I know.
Very precisely here, right? Like I grew up in a household without the internet. And then one day we had the internet. Yeah. And there was a learning curve, right? So like, what can you do on the internet? How do you use it safely and effectively? I feel like we need to do, and when I say I need to do the same thing with my children. Like my son actually has an AI tutor through Khan Academy. We're trialing it out for the school and we're reporting back to his principal on what we think and how, like, is it helping? Is it a good thing? Will it be beneficial? And so like I have had maybe 2 or 3 conversations with him about like what this thing actually is. And the rest of it has been fed to him by Khan Academy. This is what the tutor will do. And that's a place where I need to take a more active role as a patient, a parent.
Yeah. And could I add to that?
Yeah.
You have, sorry, I have my own. No, I think not just kids, right? Every training program I've been to in the last little bit, people are like, rah, AI, here's how to prompt. Okay. What they don't talk about is like, what are the ramifications of using this technology, right? And I will always preface what I do with some sort of transparency or ethical statement, talking about how was this developed. Like the first talk I gave on this was to a group of artists who were afraid that we've reached the death of art and the ethical conundrum that we were in with training AI, like Midjourney, for example, on all of the art that has been created through human imagination and ingenuity, right? And it's incredibly disheartening to be in front of a group of art students who are 17 or 18 who see their future suddenly evaporate. And so talking with them about what are some of the real possible implications of this technology on their career possibilities, on their choices, like what do we recommend they learn? And it's not just prompting, like how is this going to impact the way you use your brain? And that's the part that I skipped, is when we start talking about our knowledge base and our agency. And what are we doing? Are we creating something, or are we just putting a problem into a field and hoping that something great comes out of it, but not having the knowledge to be able to assess it? So I don't know. I think there's a lot to it, and I think we're gonna have to train kids, because at this point we've got digital natives. Right? When we, back in the day, right, like my first computer was an Atari 800, and it's basically, here's this joystick, that's it, you got one game. Right? But now these kids are so savvy, and they just assume that whatever has been put in front of them is benevolent and just for them to use, and there's no understanding that it could be harmful to them, because nothing so far has been moderated as much, or needed as much moderation, I should say.
Okay, we have another question from our online audience. Neela asks, what are your thoughts on watermarks so AI doesn't train on AI-generated material, thus losing fidelity?
The watermarks are hard to me. I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. Because you'd almost need the watermark to be embedded at like a pixelated, encrypted level. I don't know. I don't know, because you can crop out a little image in the corner easily. You'd have to cover the whole image with some sort of layer. I don't know if you know technologically what...
You can poison the data.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, like so you can
Yeah.
Yeah. So like you can modify your image files so that they can't be read. You can watermark across the entire thing, and you can actually like
of your own art.
Of your own art, but like
of AI generated art, how do you prevent the models from feeding on itself, basically?
So I know I was sarcastic about it earlier, but can I ask a follow-up question? Do you want to? Do you want to prevent them from training on AI generated art?
So, and I would add too, some people use AI generated art just to prompt and get silly images. Some people have taken it to the next level, and they look at AI as like the thing that has completely turned their careers around artistically, right? And so it's really fascinating to see how people leverage a technology to completely alter the course of their careers and to be able to do things that they could never do before. So I've seen people say, I want to use Midjourney to imagine a sculpture that looks like this, right? And so they can picture it, but they can't figure out how to realize it for themselves. So they use the tool to create that image, and then they make it in the real world. Jewelry, sculpture, whatever it may be. And so people are using it in many, many different ways, right? And I know that's not your question, Neela, but I just want to point out that like with all technologies, there are a variety of ways that people are accessing it, thinking about it, using it in their work. It's just fascinating, but yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm not a fan of AI generated art. One is there's an artist that I follow, and she once discovered an Etsy store that listed her Etsy store as a favorite store, but the artwork that this store was selling was basically hers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And under a different name and everything.
Yeah.
And so I try to avoid AI art if I can, mm-hmm. Because I know a lot of graphic artists who really hate AI for that reason. Ooh.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any another? Yes, Darren has a question or comment.
Yeah, I have a question, and I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I'm still very leery of AI. But when I think about AI, one thought that keeps coming to mind is Sturgeon's Law, which has to do, he was talking about science fiction stories, but basically Sturgeon's Law, he said 90% of everything is crap. So what I see as the next big challenge for the human race is not dealing with AI, but with content moderation. How do we figure out what is the good 10%? We've now created these large language models that can spit out volume of just stuff. How do we figure, and it's spitting it out at the rate that it's becoming harder and harder to figure out what is the top 10%. So how is AI a part of figuring out what is the 10% that's worthwhile?
So I guess my first response to that is that's maybe at the heart of human history, and we have tastemakers, we have people who are critics, we have people who have personal taste, and it runs the spectrum, right? So somebody might buy a print that is published they bought at Target, right, and see that as art relative to an original piece from an artist down the street from them, right? You can't account for what people are going to appreciate and enjoy, and so who gets to decide what that 10% is? However, things do rise to the top. And I just want to bring this up. I didn't have a chance to talk about it. This is a model I saw several months ago that I've used regularly because I think it's really helpful to think about kind of where we are in our thinking. And if you think about children, right, as a baseline, they're novices. They don't have domain expertise. And domain expertise, when I say that, I mean like, I have a PhD in organizational behavior, right? That's a domain. That's knowledge. But you can be a postal worker and have knowledge of how routines work, of how things get disseminated. There's expertise in everything that we do. And different people have different levels of domain expertise for different topics. But as a kid, you're learning. You can't filter things out. You have no critical thinking skills. But you also don't really understand the AI, right? So you're just messing around. So this is the messing around quadrant, or part of the quadrant. So sometimes people develop domain expertise, but they don't know how to use AI. But they're going to be the people who are probably going to be the most critical, because they're like, this is where we need to go. This is what we need. This is how we're going to evaluate it. Here's how we know it's true. We have the training and the understanding of something to know if it's correct. And we can evaluate if something is good or right, based on the literature. Then we have AI enthusiasts. And these are the people who I would say they're beyond messing around. They've messed around so much they now understand how to use the AI tools. They know how to prompt effectively. They've maybe even built custom tools, and they're sort of more expert in how to use the AI technology. I think where most people would like to be, and where we probably need to be in order to be able to answer some of these questions, is sort of in this area here, where we both need to understand the technology and what it's capable of or not capable of, but also have enough understanding of what we're looking at to be able to evaluate it based on what we know as humans, right? And account for what we can do as humans. So it's kind of an interesting quadrant. I think right now, I think we have a lot of people who are sort of in this area right here. And the only way we get further in either direction is to continue with education and to continue with a different kind of education in AI, right? One challenge that we're facing right now, and those of you who work in education may have a better understanding of this, but I was reading an article the other day that said most of the faculty who teach AI are being attracted by private industry. And so the research dollars, the funding of the educational programs are being privatized. So we don't really have a lot of that education happening in the public anymore. So it kind of worries me.
Your figure here is from YouTube, and your data up top is from Microsoft and LinkedIn, right? Like, we already see the problem happening.
Yeah.
Like the research on this is happening in the private sector.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm with you. The drain out of public institutions into the private sector really concerns me, because it only leads to furthering the wrong incentives, right? And it leads to more silos. So you don't get the interoperability that you need to really actually improve human life rather than just sell products.
Right.
Well, we did have an era in the 1950s when AI looked very promising, when it looked like that was going to be the future of computing. And we went through the 50s and 60s and 70s. And by the time we got to the 80s, there was just so much money in network computing and building the internet and e-commerce and stuff like that. All the power went to that for a long time. And we didn't get HAL 9000 and Robbie the Robot and things like that like we were expecting back in the 60s. But,
HAL? That didn't turn out so good.
Well, I mean,
I'm just saying.
One of them malfunctioned once orbiting Saturn or something like that. But the point is that was an expectation of AI we had long ago. And that's where a lot of the academic power was going. but it turned out there was so much money to be made with this new internet thing.
Yeah. And if you look at diagrams of how, like, I talked about Web 1 through 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Web 1, you're sort of looking at this localized individual using information that people throw at the web, right? You get to 2 and you get to that network, social red kind of thing. And then when you get to 3, I think the promise of Web 3 is really more a move towards decentralization. But that idea, that computing idea, I think is at odds with maybe the commercial interests that want to keep it isolated to their particular networks. So there's this, I don't know, I won't call it a battle, but I think there's an undercurrent right now where Darren mentioned blockchain earlier. That's a whole other parallel universe going on right now that I think some people imagine being sort of that next level of beginning to break things apart. But I don't really know if that will happen or when, because that would require a massive shift, I think, economically, to make that happen. The way we think about our economics, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a difference between Bitcoin and blockchain.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So the blockchain could be thought of as more of a like if we think about telecommunications and information processing sort of thing, I think that's how I would characterize it, is how are we transmitting information? But we've generally had centralized networks, and now blockchain allows that sort of decentralization in some cases, not all.
Web 3.0.
Yeah.
I more from a ledger, a tamper-proof ledger of blind trust. That's how you could fingerprint AI art. NFTs,
yeah.
NFTs are a bad name, but their use has potential for solving that problem. That's
I think we've now characterized pictures as NFTs as opposed to the process that you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, we're at a little lull here. I'll point out that you said that AI is now approaching consuming as much energy as the Netherlands.
That's the prediction. So I think if I recall the data, actually, I always stack my decks. So here we go. So if you look at this point here, it says the computational power needed to support AI growth doubles roughly every 100 days. And the AI industry could use as much energy as the Netherlands by 2027, consuming 19% of data center power demand by 2028 and growing 160% by 2030. So the social cost, so it's not just climate or let's say energy consumption, but there's also emissions associated with this, right? And so when you think back on technology, one of the technological evolutions that happened sort of in the 90s and 2000s was, or in the 2000s, when people would say, we're gonna buy carbon offsets, right? That became a thing for a while. It kind of went away. But I think that's where we're going again, is like the greenhouse gases associated with use of AI are so high that we're going to have people consuming AI. And I think healthcare is going to be one of the biggest challenges because they're one of the largest producers of greenhouse gases, not even including AI. But you add AI into all of these diagnostic machines that are being used and to different voice technologies and whatnot, suddenly the very organizations that are there to help you with your health are the same organizations producing the greenhouse gases that are making you ill, right, and contributing to climate damage. So we have, again, another tension. There's always this tension that we're writing of how do we harness the benefits of this technology to make improvements and make the AI run more efficiently to avoid those problems, right? So it's a challenge. Like it says, AI is a problem and a solution.
I'm going to play devil's advocate on this a little bit and say that the energy consumed by the Netherlands is going to heat homes and light homes and cook food and use transportation, all supporting human brains and human intelligence. Human brains are consuming an awful lot of energy and producing an awful lot of greenhouse gases. And some of them sometimes make really dumb decisions. Maybe the AI is a bargain compared to the humans.
Could be said. Could be. Who knows? Who knows?
Okay, we have another question coming in from our viewers on the internet, suggesting Colossus the Forbin Project. All right, Serafin Garcia says, could we solve that increasing demand by not forcing AI into every new product on the market?
We could.
But then how do we sell it?
Exactly. Because isn't it something like 80% of companies want to increase use of AI because it's the hot new thing. And they... Yeah, if you're not using AI, I taught a workshop recently, and afterwards, somebody came up to me and said, we need to get you to teach a class on how to make this work for all these companies, because everybody comes to us and says, how do we make AI work in our company? And I'm like, if you don't know, why the hell do you need it? Sorry, but that should not be your first question. It shouldn't be, how do we use AI? It's, what problem do we have that AI actually serves a really effective use for and saves us both time and money and reduces the burden on our humans so that they are liberated to, engage in more creative endeavors.
You brought up one of my favorite questions, and I don't have an answer, and I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Okay, so let's say that I have a job, right?
Yeah.
I have a job right now in the year of Beyonce 2025, and next year I'm going to have AI that's going to autonomously do 40% of my job. The easiest 40%. The stuff that I do on a Monday morning that I do, or a Friday afternoon, it's going to do that 40%. Now, 100% of my 40 hours a week is the hardest 60% of my job.
Yes.
What does that do to the future of work? What does that do to me as a worker? How does that change how we manage our organizations?
So a first thought is, if your manager doesn't know, you don't tell them. That's number one. And you use that 40% to engage in the kind of chit chat, water cooler stuff that, it's harder today. I work remotely, right? And I probably have 4 hours of human interaction by Zoom or whatever it might be a week. It can be tough. So how do you use that time then to engage in idea creation so that's part of it. But I think the point that what I'm also taking from this is, if your hardest work hours, you're using so much brain capacity, it's taxing, it's tiring, it's heavy lifting. And if you are now expected to fill 100% of your time with the hardest stuff because you're outsourcing the fluff to AI, you are going to be really, really struggling. And so our human well-being will suffer because we just don't have the capacity anymore. We're going to burn ourselves out. And I don't think people account for that. They're like, oh, well, AI should have let you be, 10 times more productive than you currently are. And so the productivity expectations and efficiencies that I think managers and the people who are making these decisions see, they don't see the toll on human creativity and well-being, and people just don't want to do it.
I'm also not sure we often ask ourselves often, should it scale? Do you really want 10 times more of whatever I am putting out? Right. You want 10 times more of that? Maybe 1.5.
Yeah. But this goes back to the strategic foresight item I mentioned, right? We tend to, I think people tend to think in terms of what's happened in the past. And if I can take what's happened in the past and multiply it by 10 by using AI in my company, it's just going to be a linear uptick, which is not true. right? Because you're going to end up with complications along the way where humans are going to get burnt out. You're going to have more attrition. You're going to have to spend more time and money training people. You're probably going to have to figure out new workflows because people can work 4 hours at that capacity and then they need a break. So there are going to be things that come along that are going to completely change the way people work. And I don't think anyone's anticipating what those changes are. They're just seeing the linear pathway to dollars. Right, more efficiency equals more money. That's not a pattern that's sustainable when we have limited capacity. We are not machines. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
You made me think of something that I learned in my undergraduate. I had one of my instructors tell me that it was a very Western idea that things are linear. That if you've got something that makes things go up, get more of it, and it will make things go up more.
Yeah.
And it was a much more Eastern philosophy concept that things are cyclical and going up and down. And if you push it up, something's going to happen that's going to make it go down. And that does make me wonder if other cultures have other ideas, other concepts of what AI is going to be doing to us.
That's a really good question that I don't have an answer to. Yeah, I don't know. I do know the US right now is really amping up because they recognize that China, for example, is developing technologies at a pace that is probably going to outpace. Like, I think our innovation is really flagging right now, and compared to what we're seeing come out of China right now. It's kind of interesting to watch and frustrating.
Everybody.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are very concerned about that and frustrated by that right now, and they don't understand why. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions here from the live in-person audience? Do we have... we have another question. Yes, or comment from Darren.
Oh, it was Jenny just brought up DeepSeek, and I had a very different reaction on DeepSeek because the Chinese came out with this AI thing, and this is like, oh, this doesn't need to be expensive. We don't need to steal all this, training material. We can do it cheaply and economically and more democratically, maybe, which is weird coming from a communist state. But I was looking at that, going like, oh, so we can get AI without all these tech bros, ranting about, burning up resources. It's like you don't need all that to get a decent chatbot. So I had a very different take on DeepSeek, and if there's a way to do it without burning up the planet, that seems like the way to go.
So I thought I would have, and this is, I am no expert in this at all, but I think China has a very... a philosophy of the long game, if you will, very strategic, very slow, but then mindful in the way that things are developing. And slow is relative, right? You're talking about an ancient civilization, right? That I think they've been able to do some things that here, where we have a mindset of fast, production, quick and easy, break it and fix it and do whatever, right? It's a very different mentality. And I think we're just going to see that when they think about things like this, they're probably thinking about it from that long view. Like, what are the long range impacts of what we're doing and designing, and how do we make it competitive in a global marketplace? And so, I don't know, it's a different mindset.
But I believe DeepSeek used Llama and ChatGPT to train their model. So while their model has gotten better and faster for cheaper, they also used the existing ones to train their model.
So it's interesting to think about the market forces at play, right? So yes, DeepSeek did take advantage of some of the originally trained models. it's also kind of neat to see efficiency be a key competitive characteristic in the marketplace, because part of the exciting thing about DeepSeek was that it was more efficient. It used fewer chips. It used that's a feature that that's been kind of missing from the American discussion on this, and I like to see it in that discussion. The other thing I will notice, talking about cultural biases in your LLMs, is when DeepSeek came out, there was a lot of discussion about this at work, and several of our Chinese data scientists were like, yeah, my family says it's really good at zodiacs and horoscopes. Something that the American LLMs have not cracked is Chinese astrology. So I thought that was really neat. It carries those cultural biases, even though cool. That's clearly not an output.
Okay, I'll point out next that a concept that hasn't come up in this conversation yet, that usually comes up in my AI conversations, is the AI singularity. Vernor Vinge's concept in science fiction writing, that once you get to a world where there is superhuman AI, it is impossible for us on this side to see what that world would look like.
Yeah.
And do you have thoughts first on the singularity?
I don't. I just wanted to introduce a concept that a colleague of mine has developed. So Peter was on my dissertation committee. He's a neurologist and has studied AI and robots for a very long time. He does some work with AI robot companions. But he's coined this term symbionic wisdom. And looking at a place, maybe not as a singularity, but as a form of intelligence, where we're able to integrate the wisdom or generate wisdom essentially through our integration with both artificial and other natural intelligences, whether it's the intelligence of trees or animals. So it's a very optimistic view, I think, of how do we as humans relate to this technology and the world around us in a way that creates the best of everything. And so I don't know, I would look to your comments. You're more familiar with the singularity, I think. And
well, there's an organization, I don't know if it goes by the name, the Singularity Institute anymore, that's been around for a long time, trying to promote many things, mostly the concept of that world is going to come, probably during our lifetimes. There's this idea that the human brain is this complicated pattern recognition, goal-seeking algorithm, and that is our intelligence. And that as AIs are built with goals in mind, with goal-seeking, once you get to superhuman intelligence, the goal of that intelligence might be the last significant decision humans ever make. After that, it could be all over. And what that goal is it a good goal or is it a bad goal? Could be super duper important.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know enough about it to really comment on that, but what I would say is what I heard in what you said is a particular form of intelligence that humans possess. And I think over the years people have talked about not just cognitive intelligence, but emotional and social intelligence, the various ways that humans are able to act. And I guess my hope would be that embedded within those cognitive goals are some social emotional guardrails / sensitivities that might inform that latter goal. And again, we've already talked about how some of these models are trained on the content of biased content, right? Particular views. That end goal is going to be informed by however we as humans contribute to that learning and training. So I don't know. How do we shape it? How do we contribute the best of us, not just the worst of us, to those models? And do we want to do that? That's an ethical conundrum of how much do we want to give to these models? I don't know. It's a really challenging thing, and I think embedded in what I was saying about people giving up their privacy in order to have a coach or a therapist or a companion through AI, we are already sharing so much of our information, and some of these companies, their terms and conditions of use don't always make that private. It could go into their training data, and so we just don't know. I mean, several years ago I gave a talk at CASE, and there was a company in China that had a dating app, and so all of the private comments that people were making to each other, they decided they were going to use those as training data, but they didn't clean the data. And so all of the names and the phone numbers and personal data that people shared became part of the training data. And so the stuff that came out of that, not good, right? Like, not good. And they basically had to scrap that. And the users were like, what are you doing with my information? This was a private conversation. One of the apps that I ran across over here talked about taking all of the comments out of a WhatsApp or a message, pasting them into an app and having the AI analyze your social relationship with somebody to help you figure out how to better work with them. And so there's a fine line of that other person didn't consent to their data being shared. Is the AI giving you really good advice, or is it manipulating you in some way? So there are all these questions that I keep coming up with, and I know I'm kind of like going off on tangents right now, but it's like there are so many questions that I have in my mind about where this goes.
Okay, I'll point out that in our entire presentation, there has been a fire cube listening in on every word we've said. So the blue line going back. We haven't said the wake word, but it doesn't mean it's not listening. How else would it hear the wake word? There are a lot of AIs out there, and one you haven't mentioned is Notebook LM.
Oh, yeah.
Which is one of the ones. There are several that will make a podcast out of a whole bunch of information.
Yeah.
And I noticed Notebook LM's podcasts are super enthusiastic.
Yes.
And I bet if we fed it a transcript of today's presentation, it would make a podcast that makes this sound like the most important presentation ever given in the history of the world. Maybe we will do that and see what happens. I would want everyone to consent to that, but I bet it would be very enthusiastic and make us sound like geniuses.
Yes, I almost used the scenarios, so that's what I often do. A talk I gave a couple of years ago, I used an AI avatar, like a visual avatar. So there are companies where you can, like, people have photographed themselves using all different shapes and whatever, mouth shapes.
I'm sorry, I was just thinking of back in 2020, there was a Zoom meeting, and what was it, a lawyer had like the cat.
Oh, yeah.
And he couldn't figure out, I'm really not a cat. He couldn't figure out how to change back.
Yeah. So these are people who have basically been paid to use their likeness as avatars, and you can give a text transcript to it and it will convert it to a video. And so I often use those to help people kind of get a taste of what that would look like. It's kind of scary to some people, right? Because they see that, and the talk I was giving with that was to a bunch of educators, and they're like, well, there goes my job. I can just like program these avatars to teach my classes and I'll go surfing or whatever. But not true. But I think that was the concern, is if you do that, then you've generated content, and why does the university then need you to teach the class? You've now created an avatar-based course that can be updated here and there. So anyway.
Okay, do we have anything else? Other than what we had come in, the last thing we had come in from our internet audience is a thank you to Dr. Stormy for this presentation. And I'd like everyone a round of applause for Stormy Sweitzer, also known as Dr. Stormy, for giving a wonderful presentation today. We hope that you got something out of this, and we hope that you will come back next time that we do the Coventry colloquium. For now, this is Mike Substelny signing off from Coventry.